How could my husband still expect me to save him after everything he had taken? I stood in Walter's house in Pine Ridge, my coat still on, while Sophie clutched the bank statements, and Nolan stared at Ethan across the dining table. Snow pressed against the windows. Ethan had just slid a statement toward me and told me to sign it. Instead, I dragged it back across the wood and said, "Then tell them why $186,400 vanished." The silence that followed felt sharper than the winter outside. Walter's hands trembled around his untouched mug, and Ethan looked at me as though I had broken something that belonged to him. 2.5 weeks earlier, I was still answering his calls, fixing his payroll mistakes, and believing I was helping my family. Thursday, January 15th, 2026, was bright, dry, and brutally cold. The windows of our Pine Ridge apartment had filmed over at the corners, and the parking lot below looked scrubbed hard by the wind. I was packing my lunch beside the sink when I noticed Walter's phone charger coiled on the counter, wrong among our coffee mugs and unopened mail, and had a strip of faded blue tape around the cable because Walter labeled everything he owned. He had plugged it in after dinner 2 nights earlier, then left without it. I had meant to call him. I had meant to do a lot of things before Ethan handed them to me as if they had always been mine. Ethan had left before dawn for a job site, taking the truck and his cedar cologne with him. His restoration company had been swallowing our apartment for months. Damp work boots by the door, invoices on the table, calls from subcontractors asking me whether checks were coming. I did the books because Ethan said I was good at details. I did his customer emails because he said clients liked my tone. I did not get paid for any of it. At the credit union, I was a member services specialist. At home, I was apparently the person who kept every loose screw from rolling under the furniture. My work phone buzzed while I was putting on my coat. The caller ID showed Ashford Memorial Hospital. For 1 second, I thought it was a member calling about a debit card hold. Then a woman introduced herself as Denise from the nurse station and asked if I was related to Walter Rowan. My fingers tightened around the charger. Denise explained that Walter had been admitted the previous evening after a fall and dehydration. He was stable, she said, but the doctor had cleared him to leave today. The family contact number in his chart belonged to Ethan. "I called your husband first," Denise said carefully. "He told me you would handle transportation." I stared at the pale tile floor. "He told you that?" "He said you were the one who could come." There were practical questions first. Was Walter walking? Did he need medication picked up? Had he been discharged before noon? Denise said he had a bruised shoulder, new instructions, and a phone with no charge. Then the anger arrived, low and hot, but I kept my voice even. I told her I would speak with Walter. She transferred the call, and there was a long wash of hospital noise before he came on, a cart rattling, an intercom announcement, somebody coughing behind a curtain. "Jessica," Walter said. His voice sounded smaller than usual, scraped dry. "Is that you?" "It's me. Why is your charger on my kitchen counter?" He paused, the way he always did before giving a number or an address. "I forgot it. I didn't think I'd be here overnight." He swallowed. "Ethan isn't coming, is he?" I looked at the charger, its blue tape catching the winter light. "No. Apparently he decided I would." Walter gave a breath that was not quite a laugh. He said he had called Ethan after the nurse checked him in. Ethan had told him he was too busy with an insurance job. Walter had called Sophie next. She had an afternoon shift at the dental office. Nolan had a bus route and could not get away. Walter said it all without accusing anyone, which made it worse. I could hear him trying to make their excuses sound reasonable. "I can come after work," I said. "Jessica," his voice changed. "Discharges today. My phone is dead." The words landed with the blunt weight of a door shutting. Ashford was 90 miles away. My manager would have to cover the afternoon member appointments. The roads were clear, but cold had a way of making every mile feel longer. I set the charger in my tote, called Marlene Shaw at Riverside, and told her I needed to leave early for a family emergency. She did not ask for details. She only said, "Drive carefully." When I ended the call, Walter was still waiting on the hospital line. "I'm leaving now," I told him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Walter said, "All right," so quietly I almost missed it. I grabbed my keys, my tote, and the coat I had not fully zipped. As I locked the apartment behind me, the charger knocked once against the side of my bag, and the sound followed me down the stairs. The drive to Ashford took 90 miles of bare fields, gray barns, and Salt Street Highway. I kept both hands on the wheel because the cold had tightened my shoulders into something hard and narrow. At a gas station outside town, I checked my phone and found 3 messages waiting beneath Ethan's earlier call to the hospital. Ethan had written, "I'm tied up, Jess." Sophie had written, "I'm too busy to leave the office today." Nolan had written, "Dad said he was okay, and I'm on shift." 3 different versions of the same refusal. I read them twice, then put the phone face down in the cup holder and drove the rest of the way with my jaw aching. Ashford Memorial smelled like antiseptic, overheated air, and stale coffee. Denise met me near the discharge desk, a tired woman with silver hair tucked behind one ear and a clipboard pressed to her cardigan. She recognized my name from the chart and explained the medication instructions in a steady voice. I signed where she pointed, first for Walter's discharge, then for receipt of the paperwork, then for the prescription packet. My handwriting looked controlled. My palms were damp enough to smear the edge of the page. "He kept asking whether anyone had called back," Denise said as she gathered the forms. "I told him you were on your way." "He expected someone not to want him alone," I said, before I could soften it. Denise's eyes lifted to mine. She did not pretend she had not heard. "He has been worried since he arrived." Walter was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, wearing the same brown coat he had worn to our apartment 2 nights before. His right shoulder was stiff beneath the fabric, and there was a purple shadow along his cheekbone. Still, when he saw me, he straightened as if he had been caught doing something embarrassing. The sight of him made my throat close. Walter had spent 30 years running commercial presses, standing in ink and heat and noise. I had never seen him look breakable. "You came all this way," he said. "Yes," I said. "Let's get you out of here." Outside, the wind cut through the hospital entrance and turned Walter's face pale. I settled him into the passenger seat, buckled his seatbelt, and handed him his charger. He held it in both hands for a second, looking at the blue tape. Then he plugged his phone into the car outlet, but instead of asking to call Ethan, Sophie, or Nolan, he watched the screen stay black. "Don't take me home yet," he said. I turned from the driver's seat. "Walter, you need to rest." "I know." He paused, his eyes fixed on the dark phone. "There's an address, 14 Larkspur Lane, Ashford. Do you know it?" "The old print shop?" I asked. I had only been there once, years ago, when the windows still held faded gold letters spelling Rowan Printworks. He nodded. "Don't tell anyone we're going there." Cold went through me that had nothing to do with the weather. "Why?" "We have to get there today." He rubbed his thumb over the blue tape, then looked out at the parking lot. "Before Ethan knows I'm discharged." I should have argued. I should have taken him home, called his doctor, called somebody who could tell me whether a man with a bruised shoulder should be riding around Ashford in January. Instead, I started the car. Walter gave directions in pieces, pausing before each turn, and the streets narrowed from chain stores to old brick houses and shuttered storefronts. The print shop stood at the end of Larkspur Lane, with snow packed against its curb and plywood behind the front windows. Walter moved slowly inside, leaning on my arm without comment. The building smelled of dust, metal, and old paper. He led me past a silent press covered in a gray sheet, through an office where calendars from years ago still hung crooked, and stopped beside a file cabinet. From the bottom drawer, beneath bundled invoices, he pulled a manila folder swollen with papers. His hands trembled as he opened it. "These are my bank statements," he said. "I hid them here after I started seeing transfers I couldn't explain." He slid the folder toward me, and I placed it carefully into my tote bag. Then he looked directly at me, his face drained under the fluorescent light. "Ethan must not know." Friday evening, I sat at our kitchen table with Walter's folder open beside my laptop and the apartment heating pipes clicking behind the wall. I had helped him settle at the print shop in Ashford long enough to make a few calls, then driven home with the folder in my tote bag, and a feeling I could not name without making it real. Now I counted practical details because that was what I did when fear tried to get theatrical. 3 transfers, 3 dates, 3 authorization pages. The total was $186,400, routed to Rowan Restoration Services. Walter had called me that afternoon from the print shop's landline. He spoke carefully, pausing before each answer, as though the words had sharp edges. He said he had never approved the payments, had never signed the authorization pages, and had not given Ethan permission to manage his savings. I asked whether he recognized the contact number printed beside his name. There was a silence long enough for me to hear a truck downshift outside. "No," Walter said at last. "That isn't mine." I wrote the number on a yellow pad and looked it up through the account tools I was allowed to access only for public information. It matched Ethan's cell phone. I printed nothing. I changed nothing. I worked at Riverside Community Credit Union, and Walter was my father-in-law. Sympathy was not evidence, and family was not an exception to procedure. Marlene Shaw had trained me on that during my first month in member services, when I had nearly cried with a member whose grandson had drained her checking account. "Feel it later," Marlene had told me. "Document it now." So I compared the routing details, the company name, the forged-looking signatures, and the number tied to each authorization. My palms became damp against the edge of the table. The elevator bell sounded in the hallway outside our apartment, and Ethan's cedar cologne announced his approach before his key turned in the lock. He came in wearing work boots dusted with gray plaster, his restoration company jacket unzipped over a black thermal shirt. He saw the papers before I could close the folder. His thumb tapped his wedding band twice. Not hard. Not nervous enough for anyone else to notice. "What's that?" he asked, setting his keys down with too much care. "Walter's bank statements," I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected. He asked me to look at them. Ethan pulled out the chair across from me, but did not sit. He leaned over the table, blocking the overhead light. "Dad gets confused when he's scared," he said softly. "He sees a number and decides somebody stole it." He looked at the transfer pages, then at me. "You know the business has been tight. You do the payroll. You see the invoices. You know what happens if cash stops moving." I kept both hands flat on the table. "Did he authorize $186,400 to Rowan Restoration?" His mouth tightened for half a second. Then he smoothed it away. "Don't ask questions like you're some stranger from compliance." He came around the table until he stood behind my chair, close enough that cedar and cold air filled my throat. "You are the only person who knows how much this family can lose." His voice stayed gentle. That was the worst part. No shouting, no threat I could repeat neatly to someone else. Just the warmth of his breath near my ear, and the certainty that he believed my marriage, my job, Walter's health, and our rent were all weights he could stack in my lap. I did not turn around. I watched the dark reflection of the kitchen window and saw his shape behind mine. When he finally stepped away, he said he was taking a shower and expected us to talk like adults afterward. If someone hides a theft inside family loyalty, does he deserve another chance? Leave one answer in the comments and follow along, because I will tell you what happened when I stopped keeping his secret. I waited until the bathroom fan came on and the shower pipes began to roar. Then I lifted my phone, photographed every statement, every authorization page, every line showing Walter's name beside Ethan's number. I opened Riverside's internal fraud channel and wrote a conflict report to Marlene Shaw. Member is my father-in-law. Suspected forged transfers. Possible beneficiary is my husband. I need this assigned away from me immediately. My finger hovered over send while water struck tile on the other side of the apartment. Then I pressed it. The message disappeared into the system, and Ethan began humming under the shower spray. 4 days later, my time had been filled with work shifts, sleepless nights, and the careful work of not warning Ethan that Riverside had already opened a file. On Tuesday afternoon, I met Walter in the lobby of the Pine Ridge branch after he took a ride from Ashford with a neighbor from the print shop block. He looked smaller in his brown coat than he had in the hospital, but he had shaved, buttoned his collar straight, and carried himself with the stiff determination of a man walking into a room he had avoided for too long. I took the folder from my tote bag and held it against my side as we waited. Marlene Shaw came through the secured door with a legal pad tucked under one arm. She was 58, silver-haired, precise, and incapable of touching a document before labeling it. Her badge identified her as Riverside's senior fraud investigator, but I had known her first as the colleague who taught me that panic could ruin a clean case. She greeted Walter by name, introduced herself, and led us into the small fraud office behind a teller line. Before sitting, she placed 3 file labels on the desk: Walter Rowan, unauthorized transfers, and family conflict. Then she looked at me. "Jessica, you did the right thing by routing this away from yourself." "I hate that it had to be routed anywhere," I said. "I know," Marlene said, and her voice softened only for that sentence. "But you are not handling this complaint. You are a witness to what Walter gave you and what you observed. That distinction protects him, and it protects you." Walter lowered himself into the chair beside mine. The office smelled faintly of toner and burnt coffee. Outside the glass wall, a teller called a member forward, and the ordinary sound made the folder on my lap feel even heavier. Marlene asked Walter to describe the transfers in his own words. He paused before each amount and date, but he did not look away. He said he had found the statements after months of feeling that his savings were shrinking faster than they should. He had started with $208,000. Riverside's records showed he now had $21,600 left. The 3 company payments, Marlene explained, totaled $186,400 and had gone to Rowan Restoration Services. Walter's jaw moved once, as if he were chewing something bitter. "That was supposed to be what I had left," he said, after the shop closed. Marlene turned her monitor so Walter could see only the relevant fields. She did not show him every internal note, and I understood why. She was building facts, not feeding shock. "The authorizations used a contact number that is not the number on your member profile," she said. "We traced that number to Ethan Rowan." Walter stared at the screen. His fingers curled around the arms of the chair, the knuckles pale. For a moment, I thought he might stand up and walk out. Instead, he said, "My son did this?" It came out low, almost formal, as if he were asking about a stranger. "We can document that Ethan's number approved the transfers and that his company received the funds," Marlene said. "The investigation will determine the full chain of responsibility." She slid a form across the desk, but she did not push a pen into Walter's hand. "This revokes any authority Ethan may have claimed over your accounts, prevents new withdrawals while we investigate, and confirms that you do not consent to further transactions through him." Walter read every line. His shoulder trembled once beneath his coat. Then he signed. Marlene took the signed revocation form from Walter's hand, dated it, stamped it received, and placed it in the open fraud file beside the bank statements I handed across the desk. She typed for several seconds, her glasses reflecting the blue light of the monitor. "The restriction is active," she said. "No new withdrawals or transfers will move without additional verification. I'm also preserving the transfer records, contact changes, and authorization images." Walter let out a breath that seemed to leave his whole body at once. "Can you get it back?" he asked. "I can begin the recovery process and document the complaint correctly," Marlene said. "I will not promise an outcome before the evidence is reviewed." That was exactly the kind of answer I would have given a member. Hearing it said to Walter made me want to hate it. But it was honest. Marlene turned to me next. "Jessica, I need your report added as a conflict statement. You found the papers, you identified the number, and you notified me. Nothing more unless I ask." I nodded. My mouth was dry, but I signed the witness statement without changing a word. Would you stay and keep trying to save the marriage, or walk away before the damage spreads further? Write which choice you would make, because what happened after the fraud notice reached Ethan was worse than his quiet warning in our kitchen. When we stepped back into the lobby, Walter stopped near the entrance and looked through the front windows at the snow-darkened parking lot. "He'll know soon," he said. "Yes," I said. My phone was in my coat pocket. Ethan's name had not appeared on the screen yet. I could have called him before the official notice reached him. I could have given him time to invent something smoother than the truth. Instead, I watched Marlene carry Walter's statements and signed revocation form through the secured door to the fraud office. Then I walked Walter toward the exit without making that call. For roughly 2 weeks, I had gone to work at Riverside, driven Walter to follow up appointments, and come home to an apartment where Ethan spoke only when he needed another invoice found, another crew scheduled, another payroll mistake covered. On Monday evening, February 2nd, Walter sat at the head of his dining table beneath the yellow light of a brass fixture, his hands wrapped around a mug he had not touched. Snow pressed against the dark windows. I stood beside the sideboard with my coat still on when Ethan arrived. The elevator bell had rung downstairs a few minutes earlier, and his cedar cologne reached the hallway before his knock did. He came in without waiting for Walter to answer, tapping his wedding band twice with his thumb. Behind him stood Sophie, still wearing navy scrubs under her winter coat, her phone clenched in one hand. Nolan followed, broad-shouldered in his bus driver jacket, rubbing the back of his neck as if he had already been told he should feel ashamed. "I got Ethan's text during my last patient," Sophie said, looking from Walter to me. "He said Dad was home and Jessica was making accusations." Her eyes dropped to Walter's cane beside the chair. "You were discharged weeks ago?" Nolan swallowed. "Ethan told me you were still in the hospital another day, then another day after that." He looked directly at his older brother. "He said Jessica had picked you up because she was nearby." "I drove 90 miles, I said. My palms were flat against the polished wood of the sideboard because I could feel anger gathering in my wrists. He had no one else. Ethan gave a small breath through his nose, the sound he made when a contractor disagreed with him. "Nobody said you did not help, but this has gotten out of control. Dad needed money. My company needed capital. We agreed it was a family loan." He pulled a folded document from his coat pocket and laid it beside Walter's mug. "Jessica, sign this as a witness. It says Dad understood the transfers and intended to support Rowan Restoration. Once the credit union sees we handled this privately, they can stop treating me like a criminal." Walter did not reach for the paper. "I never agreed to give you my savings," he said. His voice shook once, then steadied. "I had $208,000. I was left with $21,600. Ethan turned to him with a tired, practiced expression. "Dad, you were sick. You were scared about bills. You told me you wanted the business to succeed." "You changed the contact number on my account," Walter said. "That is what Jessica thinks she found." Ethan's eyes settled on me. "You work at that credit union. You know how easy it is for people to misunderstand records. Sign the statement, Jess. You are the only person who knows how much this family can lose." The front door opened again before I could answer. Marlene stepped inside, carrying her black briefcase in one gloved hand. Walter had called her from the kitchen after Ethan's text brought Sophie and Nolan to the house, and she had agreed to come only after making clear that she was there to explain records, not to argue with family. She greeted Walter first, then placed the briefcase on the dining table. Every document inside had a white label along its edge. She opened the case, removed the revocation form, and returned it to the inner pocket before setting a sealed bank envelope in front of Walter. "These are copies of the statements Mr. Rowan requested," Marlene said. Walter broke the seal himself. He lifted the stack, then handed it across the table to Sophie. "Read them," he told her. Sophie turned pages slowly. Her face changed when she reached the transfer history. Nolan leaned over her shoulder. Ethan did not sit down. His jaw tightened as Marlene explained that the 3 transfers had gone to Rowan Restoration and that the account contact number had been replaced with a number belonging to Ethan. She did not call him a thief. She did not need to. The paper lay there with dates, amounts, and his company name printed in black. "This is not proof I stole anything," Ethan said. "It proves Dad helped his son." I pulled the statement he wanted signed toward me. The paper made a dry scraping sound across the table. "Then tell them why $186,400 vanished." Nobody moved. Even the furnace seemed to stop. Sophie's fingers went white around the statements. Nolan stared at Ethan as if the room had shifted beneath him. Walter's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ethan looked at me with a flatness I had never seen in his face, and for one cold second, I understood that he had expected me to protect him, even now. "You do not know what it takes to keep a company alive," he said quietly. "I do," I said. "I know because I have been doing it for free for 2 years. I handled payroll, scheduling, invoices, vendor calls, insurance forms, customer complaints, and the books you never wanted to open. I answered messages after my credit union shift. I fixed errors you blamed on your crews. I kept customers from noticing you had promised the same equipment to 2 jobs." My throat burned, but I kept my hands flat. "That ends tonight." Ethan's color drained. "Jessica, do not do this in front of them." "I am doing it in front of them because you made all of us work in the dark." I took out my phone, opened the password manager, and wrote the office logins on the blank back page of his statement: the scheduling platform, payroll portal, company email, vendor account, and shared drive. I slid the sheet to him. "These are the passwords. Change them. Hire someone. I will not run Rowan Restoration tomorrow or ever again. I will not sign that paper. I will not explain your missing money. And I will not come home with you." Sophie set the statements down on Walter's dining table as though they might burn her. "You told me Dad was fine," she said to Ethan. "You told me Jessica was overreacting." Nolan finally looked at Walter. "I should have called you," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Walter reached across the table and covered Nolan's hand with his own. Then he looked at Ethan, not angry now, which was worse. "You lied to every one of us." Marlene closed her briefcase around the revocation form and stood. Ethan gathered the page with his new passwords, but left the false loan statement where it was. I walked past him, opened Walter's front door, and stepped onto the porch. Behind me, I heard Sophie ask Ethan what else he had hidden, and I heard Walter's chair scrape slowly against the dining room floor. For roughly a month, I had rented a small room over a florist shop, worked my regular hours at Riverside, and let Ethan's company fail or survive without my hands holding up its walls. On Thursday morning, March 5th, Walter and I entered Pine Ridge Municipal Courthouse through metal detectors and wet boot prints. The building smelled of old paper, floor wax, and coats drying in heated air. Marlene met us outside the courtroom with her briefcase tucked against her side. She had spent the previous week documenting the asset transfers and coordinating with the attorneys handling Walter's civil claim. Ethan stood near the courtroom doors in the same dark coat he wore to funerals, his shoulders bent inward. He no longer smelled strongly of cedar. He looked smaller, but I did not confuse smaller with sorry. Inside, the settlement was read into the record. Ethan had surrendered his truck, restoration equipment, and money held in escrow. Those assets recovered $141,000 for Walter. The remaining judgment against Ethan was $45,400. I watched Walter close his eyes when the clerk finished. His lips pressed together, not in relief exactly, but in recognition that the number could never repair what his oldest son had done to the family. Outside the courtroom, Ethan stopped me beside a bulletin board crowded with notices. "The company is finished," he said. 3 crews walked when payroll was late. Jobs got canceled because nobody answered customers. You knew everything. You could have stayed long enough to help me straighten it out. "I did not cause that," I said. "I stopped hiding it." "You wanted this." "No." My hand stayed loose at my sides. I wanted you to stop. Those were different things. Marlene stepped between us only slightly, enough that Ethan had to look past her to keep staring at me. The settlement assets have been transferred, she said. The clerk's office has the order for filing. She carried the signed settlement order down the hall herself, and I watched through the open door as she handed it across the counter to the courthouse clerk. The clerk stamped it, placed it in a file tray, and carried it behind a glass partition. Walter stood beside me, his cane planted firmly on the tile. Your company did not collapse because Jessica left, he said to Ethan. It collapsed because you built it on work you would not pay for and money that was not yours. Ethan looked at his father, then at me. Come home, he said. We can still fix the marriage. The words made something in my chest go quiet. I took the divorce filing receipt from my purse and gave it to him. I filed this morning, I said. You will be served through the proper process. His thumb moved toward his wedding band, then stopped. You are really leaving me with nothing. You had choices, I said. Ethan remained outside the courtroom while Marlene walked away down the courthouse hallway, her briefcase swinging lightly at her side. Walter touched my elbow. Together we crossed the lobby toward the entrance, where gray daylight showed through the tall glass doors. Ethan called my name once behind us. I did not answer. Walter and I stepped through the doors into the sharp morning air. For roughly 6 weeks, Walter and I had met for coffee, paperwork, and quiet meals that did not require either of us to pretend we were fine. On Wednesday afternoon, April 15th, spring rain streaked the tall courthouse windows while Walter and I waited near the elevator after a final filing. He had brought his cane, but he leaned on it less now. I held the door open for him when the elevator bell rang behind us. Cedar cologne drifted into the hallway. I knew Ethan was there without turning around. My shoulders tightened for one beat, then settled. Walter looked at me, not toward the elevator. You ready? He asked. Yes, I said. Behind us, Ethan said my name softly. It had once been enough to make me stop what I was doing, check what he needed, solve whatever had broken. I kept my hand on Walter's elbow and guided him forward. We need to talk, Ethan said. No, I said, still facing the courthouse doors. We do not. Walter's fingers rested over mine for a moment. It was not a grip. It was a choice. We stepped outside together onto the courthouse steps, where the rain was cool against my face and the sidewalk shone black beneath the new leaves. Ethan remained by the elevator, behind the glass and the bell and the fading scent of cedar. Thursday, January 15th, 2026, had been bright, dry, and brutally cold. By March, I understood that cold was not always weather. Sometimes it was the moment you stopped offering your hands to someone determined to use them. What would you have done in my place? Write it in the comments, and subscribe if you want more stories where the truth finally gets a place at the table.